All right, everybody, it's the moment you've been waiting for. Another episode of Remodelers on the Rise. Do you think people have been like on the edge of their seat waiting, Diane, for another
I'm
show?
I'm absolutely sure. And if they're in their car, I'm sure they're just, making sure that they've got everything all queued up through
Mm,
Spotify or whatever other podcast medium they have
they want to listen
available.
to.
Uh,
I have my friend and colleague Diane Gilson with Info Plus Accounting, and I said, Diane, at the beginning, I'll just introduce you quickly. And you said, I mean, you can read some of my bio and whatnot, but what more do they need to know other than this for a good long while? I've been helping a lot of remodelers and contractors over the years. I'm an expert at QuickBooks, and I love talking about job costing. I mean, what more do we need to add?
exactly. You've
What more would
you've
you
got
add?
it.
Okay.
Now,
Okay. So go ahead.
I've worked my way through all the certifications that are appropriate
Mhm.
for the people that I work with, and so I think we're good.
Yeah, you do have a lot. There's a lot of letters and whatnot after your name, which translates into I know what I'm doing and I can help you with this stuff. So Diane is part of a mastermind group that her and I have been a part of for a number of years. We're both Michiganders. We could have almost done this in person if we just hop in the car and go 25 minutes. Might have
Exactly.
to might have to do that next time. But what we're going to talk about today is something that I talk about fairly often, that Diane talks about often. And it's something that you, as remodelers, need to be continually improving and working on. Some of you who are listening to this are in pretty good shape with your job costing. There's always tweaks, always improvements. Some of you have no real good handle on your job costing, and that is vitally important to fix. So, what we're going to kind of dig into today is we're going to start with how remodelers make money and save money with job costing. And I kind of want to start just by getting into a question of how can remodelers make money with job costing in today's world, Diane?
Oh gosh, there are a dozen different things that we can talk about, but let's just say that you have your estimates versus actual information in front of you as you're progressing through a job. Okay.
Mm,
And all of a sudden you start seeing that those numbers aren't looking the way that you thought that they should. And so lots of times you can jump right in and fix it. And then sometimes you go, well, can't fix this one, but I want to look ahead and see if there's a spot further along in the job where we can adjust things a bit and still not end up in such bad shape. So,
mm,
that's the first thing. And then, of course, it's a conclusion of the job by going back through that information. You can do two or three things. First of all, you can say, is there a reason that certain things happened in a way that were different than what I planned on doing, and research why. Of course, you can't just jump in and start pointing fingers, but you can figure out why things happened the way that they did. And then, of course, you can also change your internal procedures and provide feedback to the people that are involved in the jobs. You can provide feedback as you go, and then also on the tail end. So uh, that way, if people know what's not working the way that you anticipated, then they can start to modify. So I like to
oh,
use the um, concept of, if you're bowling and you don't know how many pins go down, if there's a blanket across the alley and you don't know how many pins go down, it kind of takes all the fun out of it. So if you can provide that feedback to people as they go along, then they know how they're doing and where they can improve. Okay, Kyle, right now you're kind of freezing up on my end. So,
okay. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the internet went out here at this new office I am in,
Oh,
and
okay.
I switched to my cell phone connection, and we're back in business. What I heard
Okay,
before
good.
before that cut out, and we had our technical difficulty, is you started by going during the job to know where you are as far as expected versus actual for each phase of the project. To know that as you go will help you project manage differently as you move throughout the project. The analogy that came into
Exactly.
my head as you were laying that out is, if we're playing yeah, it's baseball season. I'm a baseball guy. If we're playing a baseball game and literally we're hitting, we're fielding, we're making outs, we're doing things, but we're not really keeping score. Well, it's Kenny Rogers said there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. So we'll just wait until the end. How do you like that? Tying music and baseball in with job costing. But,
There you
we'll
go.
just wait and see kind of how it all is up at the end of the game. Baloney, because your strategy as a baseball manager is going to shift based on how the game is going, based on how the score is playing out, based on, oh crap, we made an error and we made a mistake. We're going to have to adjust our strategy a little bit to right the ship and to try to win this game. Remodeler, don't tell me for a second that if you knew in the moment that we're sucking wind on this, that you're not going to make some adjustments and figure out, how am I going to right this ship and how am I going to make this project more effective? What you're getting at is a job costing system that is organized where you're able to see as you're moving along can be incredibly helpful to make you more money.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yep.
And then the audio cut out and I didn't hear the other stuff you said, but
Oh,
that's okay. We're back.
okay.
We're back on the straight and narrow. Let me ask you kind of a next question. What's the biggest expense remodelers should expect with job costing, and why is it necessary for success?
Well, there are actually kind of two answers to that. The first thing is the biggest expense you're going to run into is if you start trying to do it without knowing what you're doing.
Hmm.
Okay, that's going to be very costly. And I've seen people lots of times they end up getting in touch with me and we just see this pretty awful mess. It'd be kind of like if I tried to remodel my own kitchen.
Hmm.
Okay. And so not only would I have spent a lot of time and energy and money trying to do the remodeling job, then I'd have to find somebody to come in and undo the bad things I'd done
Mm.
and then
So give
redo
me
it.
an example of that. They tried to do some job costing. They tried to get a job costing system set up, and it's not working very well. What would that look like? What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things QuickBooks runs on lists. It's all based on a list type structure. And lots of times people will try to put all their job stages into their chart of accounts. Okay,
Mm.
sounds logical on the front end if you don't really know how the system is set up to work. And in fact, in QuickBooks, items are the way to go. And then, you don't try to load all of those cost codes over into your chart of accounts. So
Mm.
that's just, one thing that I see on a regular basis, or they
So
don't have their chart of accounts set up right.
Gotcha.
So,
So that's a very tangible example. And I think if you're listening to this, if you're a remodeler, and what she just described, not being a QuickBooks aficionado, but knowing my way around a little bit, is you have a good intention. You're like, okay, well, this is lined up like this. I'm going to just start doing this. I'm going to apply this. And what you're saying is sometimes if you have that foundation, if you have kind of the setup wrong, it can make the whole thing a lot more difficult than it needs to be and maybe not as clear as it needs to be. So it pays to make sure that we're drawing this up and designing this and implementing it correctly so that it goes smoother.
right,
Okay.
exactly. And so then, of course, like with anything, even in your remodeling business, there's cost involved with training and getting people up and running and doing things the right way. But then, of course, if you compare that with the cost of doing things the wrong way, then there's cost to do it the right way, but there's a much higher cost to do it the wrong way.
Mm,
So uh, if you want to do it the right way, then you kind of have to decide that, yep, I'm going to sink the time and energy into doing things the right way that's going to give me the most effective results.
gotcha. So as for the folks that are watching this live, if you have a question related to QuickBooks, in particular job costing related to QuickBooks, if you have a question for Diane, please type that in the comments and we can grab a few of those as we go along. But I'm going to move on to my next question as I maybe wait for a few of your questions. What's the biggest money waster most remodelers spend money on for job costing that they really shouldn't? What would you say for that?
Gosh, I think we're going to have to go back to that, trying to do it on your own
Okay.
without knowing exactly where you're going to go. And then of course, the result is that you end up looking at reports. And then if I was a business owner and I was looking at a report and I couldn't really understand what it was saying or what it was doing, or the numbers were wrong, I'd get very frustrated. And then I'd have to go back and talk to people and say, well, why are we seeing this here? And then somebody says, oh, I coded it wrong.
Mm,
So, you know, there there's a lot of time and energy that can go into a bad system, and then trying to recover from a bad system, just causes everybody a lot of frustration.
mm.
And
I, I like that. I'm going to ask kind of a separate question that came to mind, and kind of just pivot over here for a second. If I'm a remodeler and I have a really solid job costing process and system in place, what does that look like? Can you describe it? Can you describe some of the parts and the pieces of it? If I've really got this dialed in, what would I be seeing and what would I be
okay,
experiencing?
yeah, first of all, you'd have a good, if you think of it in the form of a pyramid or a construction job, you'd have a good solid foundation, which means that your structural setup is proper. So, and proper sounds very accounting ease, but
Yeah,
if you were
yes.
doing a job, you'd want to have a solid foundation before you start building around it. So in QuickBooks, a solid foundation looks like a good chart of accounts that clearly shows you what your gross profit is when you see it for your company and or for jobs. You'd want to have an item list, which would be all of your cost codes, okay, of all the different job phases. You would want to have your customer job list set up in a way so that you could see results for individual jobs in the way that you want to see them.
Mm,
You'd have a variety of other background lists put in place in a way that's going to yield the type of information that you're looking for. So,
that's great. That was great. Thank you. I just
second
want to.
part, I'm going to throw, okay.
Oh,
So,
we're
okay, that's
still
your
we're still our,
foundation.
that
Okay,
was
that's your
just our
foundation.
foundation?
Yes,
I
that's
thought we
just
were
the
kind of in the
foundation.
middle of the pyramid by now.
Okay, well, no, we're getting to the
Okay.
middle of the pyramid, and
All right, hit
that's
me.
getting good training. Okay, just
Mm,
like for your people out on the job. Okay, so that's vital. Okay, and then the third thing is what we call month end procedures. So, just like you've got a punch list, probably as you start nearing the end of a job, month end procedures are really important because it's almost impossible to get everything in to your system perfectly the first time out of the gate. So you have to have those procedures to go back through and double check everything, make sure that what you're looking at is accurate.
mm,
So,
gotcha.
okay,
Very good.
there's
Annette had a question for us. Is there a good template for chart of accounts for remodelers?
we at InfoPlus Accounting, I've developed a pre-done um, combination of chart of accounts, item codes, etc. So it's a pre-done template that we have that's available. You can find out more information about that if you go to buildyournumbers.com. Um, there are a variety of other ones out there that you can experiment with. The National Association of Home Builders has one. It's not really designed to work with QuickBooks, but that would give you some guidelines.
Okay. Did you see on the underneath as a comment to the stream before we went live, Jeff Forward, who's down in your
Oh,
neck of the woods, he had commented. He said, "Diane, I bought your template for job costing 17 years ago, and I still use it all the time." Isn't that nice?
great.
Isn't
Yes.
that
Hi,
nice?
Jeff. How are you
I love.
doing?
That's awesome. Yeah. So Annette, that's one. How many, Diane? How many hours do you think you have into developing that chart of accounts template that you have at your disposal? Just like one or two,
Oh gosh. Yeah,
or
just
do
a
you not want to
couple.
count?
Just did it in a couple. Yeah,
Okay.
it came about after I had been working with people in the industry for several years. So I'd go in and I'd help them fix everything up, and eventually I realized, there's a pattern here, exactly
Mm,
how everything should be set up. So let's go ahead. I learned from all the different people that I'd been working with what they wanted and needed in terms of reports. And so then I said, let's just build this in a
mm.
way that people can pick up and customize and modify and use it the
Okay.
way they
Very good.
need to. Yeah.
Another question that's coming to my mind. So for people to know, I mean, we prep 5P, proper preparation prevents poor performance. So
Yeah.
when you're doing a a podcast and a live show, you prep questions. But I have some questions coming to my mind that I'm wanting to ask you that aren't the questions that we prepped, but I'm talking to an expert. We can handle this. When you're working with remodelers, how does it usually work as far as who is doing most of the bookkeeping and job costing work? Do you see it work where they have an outside outside the business bookkeeper? Do a lot of people have it where they have a dedicated person in the office or somebody that's wearing multiple hats? When you evaluate how it's worked over the years and the structure, what have you seen most commonly done, and also which one seems to work the best, and maybe kind of why?
Okay. Well, most commonly I see the office manager who sometimes is the spouse who might
Hmm.
have been drafted to do
Yeah,
that type
I think
of work.
I'm up to probably, over time, I don't know how many, but dozens and dozens of husband wife teams. And I always joke, I'm like, just so you guys know, I'm also a part-time marriage counselor, which is kind of tongue in cheek and kind of serious. There's a lot of husband wife teams in our industry.
Absolutely. And so either, the spouse has a vested interest in making sure that the business is running properly and that the numbers are doing what they should. So,
Hmm.
when it works, that's great. If a spouse isn't enjoying working on that side of the business, then, it's probably better to have good trained office manager. Very seldom do I see people using outside bookkeepers.
Mm.
Reason being that most outside bookkeepers aren't trained in construction accounting or job costing. So, generally speaking, it's more effective for you to train your own internal person, either the owner or the spouse or the office manager, exactly how to set things up in the best way for the company.
It's interesting. I mean, you said it. You said it several times. Of we need to make sure it's set up properly. That's one of the biggest keys to job costing. And you've also said
Absolutely.
it multiple times of training, training,
Mhm.
training. We can't just say you're responsible for it. That idea of investing true time in training to really understand it and to do it, like you said earlier, properly, is very important. I just saw a note. One of my longtime clients, Tony Bonnet with Mactown Construction, Cassie and Tony, they went out and they invested a few days and they took several of their team members out to Builder Trend in-person training. And one of his big takeaways I saw was it was so different to really be immersed in training, to have some professional training done. It's going to allow us to really implement this well. Similarly with QuickBooks and with job costing. If I may, you do have a program coming up called CAMP, Construction Accounting and Management Program. I bet you Bailey's going to type in a little link to that and whatnot. But this is a good example of some training that you're in the middle of launching, right?
Yeah, exactly. We open the subscription to this program. We open this up so far. It's been about once a year. Okay. And in this case, we're starting the set of emails that we send out that has access to several hours of training on job costing available. And so if people want to come to buildyournumbers.com, follow the link that's going to go in here from Kyle. We'll get you in the mailing list. You'll be able to have access to the all those series of videos, be in-depth training, and then also access to the construction accounting and management program that we're
Camp.
making open right now.
Excellent. And it's almost camping season. It's almost
Yeah,
summertime.
there you
Cool.
go.
Annette said, very serious. It definitely brings a lot more challenges. I think he was talking about the husband wife component. That's why we need a coach like you to be our mediator. We will listen to you, but not always to each other. It's true sometimes. Jim has a question for us. How important is it to have the estimating codes align with the cost codes? And then we'll kind of ask us that. The second part is, and what system do you recommend for capturing field purchases back in the office? So, Diane, I'm guessing you're going to say it's not important at all, and I don't lose any sleep over this. How important is it to have the estimating codes, all of those different line items, all of the different lines that make up your estimate to align with the cost codes in QuickBooks? How important is that?
Well, as you implied, it's very important, with one exception. Okay,
Mm,
so when you're estimating, let's say that for a particular job phase, let's say it's framing. Okay, and you have your employees working on the framing side. You might want for the estimating side to keep in mind all of the different types of work that could happen on the estimating side and the labor that goes along with that. However, for people out in the field, they may not be able to break their time down quite as in a detailed
Granularly.
manner as you've got in your estimate. So you might want them to record their time at a little bit more generic level, like framing. Okay.
So even and I want to interject this here. When it comes to job costing, there's just a lot of decisions that you need to make, and you just got into one right there. Yes, it would be very interesting to see this type of framing and this type, and the granular view of maybe 4 different parts of it, and you may
Mhm.
do that on your estimate to get into details. But then we have decisions to make that says, do we want to have equally granular detail within QuickBooks and in our job costing? We have decisions to make and to decide on how detailed and really what is the ROI of tracking it that closely, of having our team log in and click framing and this particular part of it. So that's kind of what you're describing there. Is there sometimes where we may be a little more granular on the estimating side and maybe a little more generic on the cost code side?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. But for the most part, what? You want those to align pretty well?
Yeah, in general, for at least for each major job stage. And then, when it gets to materials, that's a lot easier, or subcontractors, that's a lot easier in the back office to be able to line up line by line. But
Hmm.
yeah, that one on employee labor that I just mentioned is one spot where we can get by with just a little less detail on the tracking side.
It's good to hear you say that, Diane, because you're a very detailed person. You're like, look, we don't, there's times where we just need to back off of our detail and just get the good summary point.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
Sometimes,
always
not
a
always.
cost benefit.
Yeah,
I try to walk the line on what's the cost benefit. Is this information going to be valuable? Will you use it or not? And if you're
yeah.
not going to use it, if it's not valuable, then let's back away a little
Yeah.
bit. So
And I just love that idea of you need to make these decisions for your remodeling business. So, business owner, you may not need to be the one that's entering in everything into QuickBooks or entering in or knowing how to run the reports for this. You may have somebody on your team that does that for you, but you certainly need to be immersed in it enough to help with the strategy of how we're setting up job costing. So, don't kick this, punt this to somebody else on your team. Like a lot of things in business, the strategy of how we're setting this up and some of those decisions of how granular needs to be, maybe involve a few more people. But the other thing that comes to mind is, have you even thought about it? Have you even wrestled with your system enough or dug into your system enough to kind of decide if you want it this way or that way? That there's work to be done there for a lot of people listening to this. And then Jim's second part, it says, and what system do you recommend for capturing field purchases back to the office?
okay, well, generally those field purchases are being done on company credit cards. Okay, or maybe somebody's personal credit card. And now some of the more recent versions of QuickBooks allow mobile capture. Okay, so you're going to see those costs come in via the credit card if you're waiting and putting things in when the statement comes in, but that's kind of late. But now there are mobile applications where people can just snap a picture, send it back in, and then you can get that pretty darn quickly into your
Hmm.
books.
Okay. All right. I like it. Going on to a couple other questions. Time flies. We still got some more time remaining. I did see that Bailey tossed in the old comments. Just a little link to that camp program and how that works. Feel free to take a look at Diane's program that she's got launching this week and early next week. If we were to look at or think about some examples or stories of who is really doing some fantastic work with job costing, who comes to mind, or what's a story that comes to mind, and what can those listening to this learn from it?
Okay, well, one of my clients, and of course, I never divulge anything really specific about clients. That's part of being an accountant. It's all
Hmm.
very confidential. But
Wait, am I supposed to do that as a business coach too?
I'll bet if
Oh,
you
okay. I didn't check the details on that. Maybe I should keep my mouth shut more
exactly.
often.
But one example of somebody that I worked with, a little while ago, was he was doing work for both residential and commercial. And when we started looking at the difference between different types of work, he found out that he was making about 10% more gross profit on his residential jobs than he was on his commercial jobs.
Mm.
So, of course, you're only going to know that type of, you can check, for instance, what kind of models or what kinds of jobs are you getting different types of results on. But that 10% difference was pretty significant. And so ultimately, he ended up shifting his whole business into the higher gross profit work, and changed his website, changed everything. Basically, decided that he'd prefer to do work on jobs that earned him a higher gross
Mm.
profit.
And we,
Amazing. But
and
he
what?
wouldn't
Yeah,
have known that. He
right.
wouldn't have known that.
There's the numbers don't lie, and the numbers tell a story, and the numbers allow us to make smart, wise business decisions. And there's too many remodelers that they kind of might have a little bit of a hunch on certain projects that aren't profitable. They kind of have a hunch that maybe their estimating is a little light or off in certain areas. But when you see the numbers clearly, it allows you to be a much more confident business owner. People listening to this, the top 10, 15% in the remodeling industry, the people that if you looked under the hood and really studied their financials, their overall profitability, the net profit that they're able to pull from the business, newsflash, those top 10, 15% of people have put the effort into job costing, and they know how the numbers are flowing through. They're expected versus actual. That is, there is not a single remodeler that you would look up to profitability wise, etc., that hasn't invested a lot of time and energy into this. You need to be just as good at job costing as you are at doing your finished trim work and delivering a wonderful remodeling project. Do you agree with that, Diane?
Absolutely.
Double thumbs. Do you have a double thumbs up for that?
There's a double thumbs. Yep.
Okay, there we go. And what you were just saying of that example, just one of many examples. I'm going to ask you for one more as well of another job costing example. I had just read an article yesterday related to Dow Chemical, and I can't remember exactly. I was reading something else. I clicked over and I started reading about the Wikipedia page, and they're here. They're big business here in Michigan, up in Midland. So I drive by there, every so often. And I was reading a portion of it, and it talked about they do a lot of plastics, they do a lot of chemicals, and they decided strategically several years back to no longer do some chemicals and some plastics. They referenced, the plastics that go for plastic bags as an example, because the gross profit margin was around 5% on that. And they decided to put more of their time, effort, and resources towards the non-commodity work that they do that then garners more in that 15-20% of gross profit margin. Here's a billion dollar business who is making strategic decisions based on what? Job costing, based on profitability of the different types of work they do. Do you guys see that correlation? It's very similar to what Diane just gave. And yes, her example was residential versus commercial, but you're also going to see the differences between additions, between kitchens, between bathrooms. And it's going to start to paint a picture that is going to give you some strategic insight that you can make decisions on. What's another example of job costing and kind of results of it?
Well, I think it helps people on time and materials jobs to make sure that everything gets passed through to their customer. On time and materials job, you're really doing accounting on behalf of your customer. Okay. So you're passing everything through to them. And if you can see your estimates versus actuals, and you can see the actual dollars coming through, you're not going to miss. Things are not going to fall through the cracks, because if something falls through the cracks, you get to eat it yourself and you lose the markup. So that's a pretty expensive thing that can happen if you're not job costing. And I've seen that happen more than once when people start putting their job costing systems into place and then look backwards a little bit, and they start seeing where, oh, this fell through the cracks and that fell through the cracks.
Yeah.
And so just staying on top of things can be huge.
Yeah. And, to kind of piggyback off of that, one thing that's just been more eye opening to me lately as I just see more examples of it is estimating is really hard. Estimating is really, really
Mhm.
hard, and it's ever changing. And the numbers that you guys are dealing with, and the changes, et cetera. Estimating is hard. Getting into the nitty gritty details to make sure you cover everything. And one of the huge benefits of having your job costing dialed in is that it gives such great insight into your estimating. The good solid job costing system makes you an incredibly more effective estimator for the points that you made. There's things that we forgot. I didn't even include that. I didn't even realize that. Wow, I always put 10 hours in for that. And boy, I've been watching the job costing, and it's not that our carpenters are being knuckleheads. It just takes them longer than I was expecting. And now I have insight into that. Good job costing really makes you a better estimator, which is a huge benefit.
A
Um,
feedback loop. Can I
yeah.
mention one more thing real
No,
quickly, Kyle?
no, no, no. Yes, you may. Of course you may.
Change orders. I'll tell
Yes.
you what, if you're not keeping track of those change orders as they go through, they can turn right around and bite a very tender part of your anatomy. One of the very first people that I ran into when I went to a remodelers meeting said that he had just had a very tough lesson that he learned. He got to the end of the job and brought in the change orders kind of after the fact. They hadn't been paying really close attention, but they'd been running change orders throughout the job. And he ended up eating $30,000
Mm,
because they hadn't been processing and charging for the change orders as they went through. So change orders is another great place where you can earn what you should be earning, okay,
yes.
and not losing. So
Yeah, and when you're watching your job costing closely, those change orders or potential missing them kind of pops out a little bit quicker, right? It's like, wait a minute, we're way over on this phase hours wise. What's up with this? Oh, that's right. We spent a whole day doing that. We haven't written up that change order. So that's a good point.
yeah,
Also, on the topic of change orders, let me for shock value. Here's how we do change orders. We stop what we're doing. We write up the details. We get the client to, we price it. We get the client to sign it, and we collect money before you do any of it. In a best case scenario, that is exactly how you should approach it. And frankly, a lot of times you're able to do that if you are disciplined and you make it a point to do that. Yes, there are times on your project where you are going to continue working and we don't want to delay the project, and you're going to take the risk of not having it written up and signed off and do the change order. But there's a lot of change orders, and there's also the attitude that you need to have yourself as a remodeler and also for your team that says, when we run into a change order, it is a big deal. We stop, we pause, we make sure it's written up, we write it up, we sign it, we collect it. Do not wait for the end of the project to present change orders, because it's a crappy way to end the project and to surprise people with.
exactly.
Hmm. Okay. And then Annette snuck a little question in here. We were actually thinking about charging for estimating the change orders too, because it's one thing to get your overhead and profit on them, but we spend so much time estimating them versus just estimating one time at the beginning of the project. Interesting. We might also call it something like management of undefined selections on the initial estimate. Well, there we go. Always be improving. What I see there with Annette is she's paying attention to her costs. She sees where those costs are, and she's
Right.
thinking through, how can we improve this for next time. Wonderful. So again, if you guys, is timeliness, if you're watching this or you're listening to the recording, Diane has her camp program, construction accounting and management program. There'll be links on the recording, or you can just go to buildyournumbers.com and you'll see some details on that. We talked several times today about just making sure that your team or whoever is taking this responsibility of job costing on is properly trained. And this would be a really, really solid way to go about that. Diane, what is something that you didn't mention related to job costing that you really wanted to? And then we'll kind of wrap up. Anything come to
Well,
mind?
I think your enthusiasm, Kyle, for job costing, because you work with so many people in the industry, and you see, in many cases, because of the groups that you run and so on, you see the impact of job costing. So I'd say, your endorsement is really important, and I just want to thank you for that. There are so many different aspects of job costing. Wish I could go into all
Hmm.
40 of them here, but I think we covered some really good high points.
I agree. I agree. And Annette said, "I will definitely be signing up for camp. Thank you!" Triple exclamation mark. So she's
Okay.
on the right path there. Cool, excellent. Thank you so much, my friend, and thanks
Okay.
everybody for listening. And we will see you again